device A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Let's see here. Is there any other cameras here? I'm going to restart everything I was saying. A, B, C, D. Can you hear me now? A, B, C. Okay, what was happening was that Streamlabs again reset my settings. The trouble is every time I plug in an Oculus headset into my computer, it keeps changing the settings for the audio device, and it drives me crazy. Well, I'm going to start all over, so pretend that the few minutes I was just rambling and nobody can hear me is gone. So we will, once again, try again. I haven't done Burgertime in about 3 months, and since events occurred recently that has now given me more free time, I'm now able to start looking into doing more of my podcasts here on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook on a more regular basis. So what'll happen is that I am planning on just picking out topics, talking about them, maybe doing it every bi-weekly, like every other week or something like that, on a more scheduled time frame. But what had happened recently is that the topic for today is going to be Doom for the 3DO. And I'm not going to rehash what I had spoken about in my Burgertime podcast I did on YouTube back in 2015. If you want to hear the horror story of the development of Doom from that perspective, go to YouTube, pull up Burgertime, Doom 3DO, enjoy. What we're going to talk about is the full motion video. What had happened when we were developing Doom was that Randy Scott, the CEO of Art Data, was not sharing information with a lot of people. But then again, he wasn't being quite truthful with a lot of people because he was advertising that the game was going to have new weapons, new levels, new stuff, and none of that was true. I mean, he may have imagined that, and had he had the budget and had the time that he could have given the development team to do such stuff, he could have delivered on a promise. But unfortunately, that was a lot of money to be able to do what he was claiming that he was going to provide. Unbeknownst to me, he had hired a film crew that had worked on a video game of his company's doing called Chess Wars: A Medieval Fantasy. Now, Chess Wars was a game that I had no involvement in, but Chess Wars was a game developed by Art Data in which the game itself was chess. But when you made a move, unlike Battle Chess from Interplay, which actually did the moves on the board with full animation, etc., what he had planned was he was going to have actual actors in costume do a full motion video cutscene so that you say pawn takes pawn, and it will just play a video of two people dressed as pawns fighting each other, and then the guy's going to die, and then it goes back to the chessboard, and your piece is in the new position. This was filmed with an actual film budget and costumes and everything. Now, granted, while he did hire actual actors, stage crew, costume designers, from what I've been told, after the fact, he kind of stiffed a lot of them, or at least paid them some amount of money, but not the full charge it should have been, because the whole thing was done with a shoestring budget. And like everything else with Art Data Interactive, there was no plan whatsoever of a realistic budget, realistic timeline, because there was, from the point of view of somebody who has no knowledge about how films are made, he had no idea of things like you need a shooting script, then you need to storyboard it, then you have to plan out each of the shots, then you have to deal with all the color, etc. None of that was done because he never thought about any of that. Well, as I said in my previous video, when I was developing Doom for the 3DO, Randy Scott honestly believed if you took a PC CD and put it into another machine, you know, like if you took the PC version of Doom and put it into a Mac, it should just run on a Mac. He didn't have a concept that those are totally different machines, and even though CDs are identical, went as far as believing that if you took a JPEG, basically a hand drawing of some new weapon, and that's all you drew, a single frame, of a new weapon, you would then be able to just simply, by putting that JPEG in the WAD directory of Doom, the game would automatically not only allow you to select this weapon, but it will automatically, from magic, have the bullets that actually fire, putting in the ammo drops, the drops of the weapon itself in all the levels. He had no concept that, just because you give me a JPEG doesn't mean that the weapon can be in the game by this afternoon. It takes a lot of work and planning in order to figure out where you put the weapons. I mean, in most modern games, the choice of weapons are done within the first few weeks of the game design, but you haven't even made a game yet, and then all the game mechanics and all the levels are only planned around those weapons. You just can't drop in a JPEG of a new weapon and automatically put in it into the entire game. It wasn't just JPEGs that he believed this could happen. He honestly believed full motion video could be done the same way. That if he gave me QuickTime movie files, remember this is 1995, so MP4s and RKVs, those didn't exist yet. Back then we were all QuickTime movie files. And he believed that if you took some actors in front of a green screen and no account for lighting or shadowing, or if the fact that the green screen even covers the entire background, none of that mattered. It's just if people are standing there and the demon's going rah, 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 that I could just take that QuickTime movie file, again, drop it into the folder of Doom, then automatically the cutscene would not only be playing in the game, but he actually thought it would be superimposed into the 3D world. Now, I was working on a game called Killing Time for 3DO, which we did have that. And he believed that, oh, well, that's how you did Killing Time. Because in Killing Time, it was a 3D shooter game in which you go to certain rooms and then a QuickTime movie play of certain ghosts. And they're actually in the game, so as you move around, the movies scale and move properly, so they're all locked in. But he believed that the way we put those in there was that we just simply took the QuickTime movies and dropped it in the WAD file. Done! Not factoring that while we did have QuickTime movies in a folder, we had to put a spawn point in the map and then code that would drive that to be able to play the movie onto a sprite and then have to factor in the 3D audio and so forth. I mean, it was all, there was a lot of work to do this. It wasn't just like, oh, can I just drop the file in there and see it this, like in an hour or two? Well, unbeknownst to me, because remember, most of this stuff I'm telling you is through hindsight. When I was developing Doom for the 3DO, from the day that I met with Art Data Interactive to just 2 weeks before we were ready to put this game onto a CD to be burned and encrypted at 3DO to ship, I was approached by Randy over at Art Data and saying, hey, I've got these QuickTime movie files. Can you put them in the game for me? And I didn't even bother looking at these files because I'm like, dude, I am literally days away from finishing this game and you're asking me to put in full motion videos in a game that has, I don't even have a level editor, for crying out loud, because these levels, I just pulled them from the Jaguar version. I didn't even have a level editor. I mean, I could import the data, process it to make it more 3DO friendly, and spit it out with the tool I wrote. But no, I can't edit anything. Because, when you only have 10 weeks to develop a game, you have to take a lot of shortcuts. And trust me, every shortcut I could take, I took. But he says, but I spent all this money on this footage. And it's like, what footage? What are you talking about? And then that is when one of his assistants came up to me and said, oh yeah, we filmed this in one of his rooms over at Art Data, and he's been having people edit it and work it for quite some time. And I'm like, this is news to me. No? How about no? And at that point, that was the end of that conversation. and I then focused on doing the rest of the game and getting it shipped out. And of course, once Doom for the 3DO left my hands and it went into the loving arms of 3DO for encryption, and then the encrypted disk went to Art Data for manufacture and duplication, I simply stayed at home, or when I did come into the office, I was just playing like, Half-Life or Quake or just basically just sitting. Was it even Quake at the time? No, it was Doom. It was Doom 2. But I wasn't really playing Doom. I was just more like playing Wolfenstein for the Mac, or I was just napping, or just doing mundane. Although I wasn't technically CEO of Logicware at the time, that was someone else. But I was a CTO. But I was just more like, I don't want to hear any. I don't want to do any dev. I don't want to do anything. I just want to go ahead and just pass out. And then, of course, I find out about the Art Data pressing 50,000 copies of the game, thinking that they're going to sell that many. And, of course, most of them ended in a landfill sitting next to E.T. and Raiders of the Lost Ark somewhere in New Mexico. That part I have no idea about where the 3DO Doom games are. For all I know, Art Data still has them in a warehouse somewhere. Or maybe they threw them in the dumpster. I don't know. But what does happen is that a year and a half later, I was then approached by one of the former people at 3DO. And he's now a good friend of mine even to this day. And he told me about, hey, did you know that they wanted to do some full motion video? And I'm like, yeah, I kind of remember that. But as far as I remember, before I go curl up in a fetal position and go under my desk for a couple of years. But he says, oh yeah, here's a couple of photos. And I look at the photos like, he wanted me to put this in that game? He says, yep. So after he gave me this set of photos, I digitally put them in the computer and set them aside and kind of forgot about them. And it wasn't until around 2015, 2016 when I was rummaging around and I found the images again. I said, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and post these up on Twitter and Facebook because no one's going to believe me. I mean, nobody's ever going to believe me that there was a full motion cutscene that was intended for Doom for the 3DO. So I posted those pictures, and of course, I got a lot of hits on Twitter because people are like, what? What? In 1995, there was a live-action version of Doom? And I'm like, yes, but unfortunately, because I really had little to any involvement in this. I mean, my only involvement was that I was being shoved a CD that supposedly had the files on it, and I politely returned it because I'm like, no, I'm not, because if I take this disc, I'm committing to putting this in the game, and there's no way, I'm already not sleeping at night because I'm working, 16-hour days. No. And that was the last I ever heard of it. Well, just recently, I was approached by a reporter for Tech 64, I think it was. I have to look it up, but it's in the Twitch link. I went ahead the Twitter link, because I made certain I credited him. And he contacted me to ask me questions about the full motion video of Doom for 3DO. I answered his questions, and then we started a conversation. And then he told me that he actually contacted the costume designer. And the costume designer had a whole slew of photos, to which he shared it with me. And I looked at these photos like, holy heck, these are photos I don't even have. And so hence I went on Twitter, I asked him if I could get permission to release these photos, and he says, professional courtesy, let him get the scoop. So, held back, but I kind of hinted that, yeah, I got some photos, but I have to wait a little bit. His article came out, as promised. I went ahead and promoted his article. I waited a little bit more because, he's got to get his hits. And as a courtesy, go over and read the article, that one he just posted. The date of the article is August 22nd, 2022. And the article is basically about his interviews of the people who were at the costume design company. And of course, they did spend money, about $10K, I think it was, on a Baron of Hell suit, in which the suit was kind of inspired from the Icon of Sin, in which you have the demon head and the exposed brain. but the body itself was actually from an ogre costume that they already had. So the only thing they actually made custom was the head, and for the feet, they covered it up by just taking the boots that were there for the actor, and they put like sheep skin on it to make it look like goat leggings or something like that, to cover up the fact he had human feet. And then they had custom gloves made, which had 3 fingers. So this is how you'd wear the gloves, like this. So it looked like it had 3 fingers. So, pair of gloves, demon head, bodysuit from some other costume, so it wasn't made custom for this, and modified legs so that you can't see the feet. Instant Baron of Hell! And they then got an actor and an actress, and they were professionals, just so you know. Everybody in the film shoot were Hollywood professionals. So none of them were amateurs. These people knew what they were doing. The only problem, though, is that when they got into the room and they said, wait a minute, the green screen isn't big enough and the lighting isn't enough. We don't have enough lights for this. But from what I've understood, the people from Art Data says, don't worry, we could, it'll work in the game. And they're like, it's your nickel. And they went ahead and filmed, just from what I've been told, just random scenes. So if anybody thinks that there's an actual movie, they never filmed scenes that would actually can be edited together to make any sort of a movie. These are just like the demon would be holding some guy like this and putting his head in there, put some guts in there to make it look like he's eating, blah, blah, blah. So they thought, hey, this will be the cutscene we put in whenever you die. And then another one is that they had the male and female leads sitting behind what was it called? One of those literally it's a cooler, but it's supposed to be like crates, and they're looking up with the guns like this and just talking with each other as if there's some invisible monster there. I don't know what they thought that was going to be used for. Maybe they thought I was going to put people behind crates and animate them while the big rocket demon was there. Maybe that was what they were envisioning. I don't know. But the whole point was they just did a bunch of these random scenes. The monster doing this, walk cycles, the guy just going rawr and throwing things. And as I understand that there was an attempt to make a script and film the script. Now, those are things I may or may not know, because, again, I wasn't there. I'm only conferring to you things that I've been told what had occurred, and based on the photos I've seen, which then back up the things I have heard, and those things that I've heard, in which the photos kind of disprove, I'm just tossing out. But the photos did disprove that it was like a 10 by 10 green screen. They only had like 2 lights. The photos themselves, you could see it's inconsistent lighting. And another issue is that in many of the photos, you could see the edge of the green screen. So, and from what the interview had with the reporter, he was saying that even the film crew was saying the camera is too far back. The camera is too close. If we filmed it at this close where the background is all green, so the only solution is to move the camera back so they could properly get everybody in the field of view, the field of focus, but it meant that you could see the edges of the green screen. And, of course, our brilliant CEO at Art Data just said, don't worry about it, just film it that way. We can rotoscope it out or something like that, and not realizing that that's exactly the same mistake that got Stone Keep thrown into development hell for 5 years. Exact same decisions were made there. So, after it was like a 1-day shoot, they filmed some stuff, maybe, from what I understand, like 1-2 minutes of actual usable footage, but not consistent. It's like 10 seconds of this, 15 seconds of that, 20 seconds of this, 5 seconds of that. They then put it all in the can, and then took it to wherever their actual editing studio was, did some color correction and so forth, but really it's still, you can't really crop out the stuff. Remember, we're talking 1995 tech. So they were filming this on VH or Betamax tapes or something like that, or maybe they were using actual film. I don't know what they used to record it, but it was certainly not digital of digital cameras or things like that, because even 1995 digital cameras, while they did exist, they were frightfully expensive, and they were only like maybe 480p resolution, which is pretty low considered today. Now on the 3DO was only 320 by 240 resolution visual screen. So if you filmed at 640 by 480 with a low-res digital camera, then you could use that footage and reduce it down and make something pretty decent quality on the 3DO. But it's, again, if the footage is to be found, expect it to be either on some sort of professional Betamax cassette tape, actual 35mm footage, or more likely 16mm, to be honest, or a digital camera with a resolution max of 640 by 480. Because, again, 1995. But from what I understand, the people who made the costumes and stuff like that were basically working for, they'd come off working for Chess Wars, and I know some of them were expecting to be paid, and they were told, well, in order to get paid, you have to work on this footage, and then, of course, they never got paid. Now, some people were, like, working with the costumes and stuff, and that was, like, you had to pay in advance. From what I read in the article and my interview, my talk with the, what was it called? My talk with the reporter, he was saying that the Art Data spent something like $10K to have that suit made. Now, I do know that the suit itself was used at E3. A gentleman who worked at Art Data, who was our line producer, basically our contact with E3, our contact with Art Data, he was at E3 where Art Data actually got a booth in which they were showing off, I think, Rise of the Robots, Chess Wars, and then they had just the PC version of Doom and claiming it was the 3DO version. But they had this guy, who's my friend, in that suit, walking around going "arr" to people. Because at the time, now of course, at the time, they were promoting Doom, but the game wasn't in any way, shape, or form ready for to be shown to anyone. But so the suit has actually made public appearances, and I understand that the people at the costume design company may still have pieces of the suit, and they may use it for, like, scaring people in Halloween, but that's pretty much all I know is, like, where the suit is. But as far as the other costumes, the male and female leads, I think they were just standard prop soldier uniforms, like just standard camouflage uniforms. They just put them on with no insignia, nothing. Like, there's no UAC emblems, if I recall correctly, or anything made like that. And the guns were just standard, just props they got from a prop shop, which, of course, once the shoot was over, they returned everything. But the only thing that was custom was the demon costume. But, back to why? Why was this even filmed? And it goes back to utter ignorance of the video game development process. In the idea that if I was to make a video game that had cutscenes in it, you figure out the cutscenes and where they go in the game before you even start developing the game. You don't wait till the game's 2 weeks from shipping and then tell your exasperated developer, hey, got some more work for you. Can you drop these MP, in this case, QuickTime movie files in there? And that's when, Urge to Kill is rising. So, whatever. Now, because I found those pictures back in 2015 from my friend, formerly of, when I refound the pictures from Doom's full motion video, I have been on kind of a quest to see if I can get any footage of it. I did find one person who may have some of it, but for whatever reason he doesn't want to give it up, or maybe he doesn't have, I don't know. But it's kind of like, reminds me of the hunt for the lost Sailor Moon pilot, for the live-action Saban Sailor Moon pilot, which was only unearthed like about a week ago. maybe one day I may be posting up on Twitter saying, hey, I just got this MOV file that I think will blind you forever. And then that's when I will show you what I've found. But of course, I'm still looking around for that horrible pot of gold somewhere. Worse I5 writes, Saban Moon. Man, that was rough. I could pretty much guarantee you that if I do unearth the Doom 3DO footage, it will probably make Saban Moon look like a Marvel film. I mean, it was that badly organized, in which, while the film crew was professional, the people doing it, and they were acting and they were doing stuff, they were doing their jobs. But what they were being told to do was totally nothing that could be used in a video game. Absolutely nothing. So therefore, it was, hopefully they got paid for their time, but it was essentially a giant, big waste of time. Worse, I5 writes, bring on the pain. Well, if I do, and this is a promise, if I ever do get in my grubby little hands any footage of any kind of that terrible moment in time where Doom for the 3DO's full motion video was filmed, or even behind the scenes footage, I will share it. That is a promise. I just have to say that I don't have any, because if I did, it would already have been released. I would not hesitate with that. In fact, the JPEGs I just released now, the only reason I hesitated was because I made a promise to a reporter, and I kept my promise. But now that my promise has been fulfilled for the gentleman, I promoted his page, and I then went ahead and posted all the pictures for all of you to just scream. Because when I was looking, going like, yeah, this is pretty close to the pictures I got before, but they were definitely done from somebody else who took the pictures. So let me go here to the questions, because we always love our questions. We've got, I should watch that, I learned from you by the section of Fabian Solgard's Doom Black Book. Yep, there's, looks like a bowling video between chess turns. There are people, okay, how are people like that? I believe the context was, how are people who get money to fund game development studios have absolutely no knowledge of how game development works? You tell me, because this is something that happens way too many times. I have lost count the number of times I've had people approach me saying, hey, Becky, can you write a game for me? I just have an idea, and I'm going to share with you this idea, and I want to cut you in for 50%, and I get the other 50%. And I then tell them, an idea is worth nothing. Absolutely nothing. And it's worth negative points if your idea is, we take Doom and cross it with Street Fighter. What do you think? That's where I take the band hammer and smash you up the side of the head and say, you know what? Leave my sight before I get arrested for murder. But for, anyone else, it's like, oh, I have an idea for a game. Great. It's got these characters. It's got these lands. It's got these positions and this. I got this all laid out. I also have the estimated amount of time it would take you from starting the game to the end of the game. And you know how much time it takes to write such a game design document? About a week to 3 months. Not, ooh, I have an idea. Now I get 50% of all the royalties. It doesn't work that way. No. And unfortunately, people like the guy who ran Art Data was in the category of, I got an idea. Let's put Doom on the 3DO. And that's the sum total of his contribution. Now, I will have to take that back partially, because he is responsible for that kick-ass soundtrack that's in Doom 3DO, because he had a garage band, and I needed to get him off my back, and I needed music for the 3DO, so it was a win-win. Gets him off my back, and I get a soundtrack for the 3DO version, and I don't have to do anything to do that music. While I can compose music and I can play instruments, I can't do that and make a video game at the same time. There's not two of me. So, woot. Worst 15 writes, what the hell is compositing? I can imagine him saying, Yeah, I don't think he even knows what that term means. Now, of course, for people who don't actually know, the one or two of you who do, compositing is the act of basically taking this image of me, editing out the room around me, and then putting behind me a scene like a scene from Little Mermaid and so forth. Basically, compositing two images to make a new image, which is a blending of the two. And of course, the idea of a green screen is it makes software. Back then, it was like Studio 32 and, of course, the early versions of Adobe Photoshop. And you had to, composite in the video game, or at least whatever background we're going to be using with whatever the full motion video was. But unless the lighting is consistent, then you have to do that. You have to do a lighting pass and a color correction pass and a shadow pass and a cropping pass and so forth. And you know how much artists costs? They cost money. And they cost time. And it's not like, oh, I'll take this movie file, put it in the folder, and it will magically fix all that. And I've got a bridge to sell you. Next. The managers think you can just do a sounding sometimes. Yeah, I can give that. Devil's Explosive Runes. Let's see here. Revier says, I can't work because I want to pay attention to the stream. Pink Emma writes, hey, Becky. Hello, Pink Emma. Let's see here. Let's see. Random buffering. Oh, I'm sorry if there was any buffering issues. Hopefully everything's going on. Let's see here. Gamma Dev writes, point them to Shark Tank. Yeah. If anybody comes to me and says, I got a great game idea and I don't want to invest any money into it, well then maybe Shark Tank will laugh them off the stage. Pink Emma goes, okay, how about making an app? Sure. Xcode is free. Android Studio is free. Be my guest. Don't involve me. First time chat from viewer. Literally a ghost. They have Jedi mind tricks and can fool investors with buzzwords. Well, that's exactly how Art Data got his money. The way he raised the money for Art Data Interactive was, and again, I'm not kidding, he went to this church and somehow convinced members of the congregation that he should be given this money because the video game industry was so insanely profitable that if he takes their money invested in Art Data, that he will quadruple or bring back more money 4, 5, 10-fold. Who knows? But what matters is that he got their money, used the money to spend $250,000 to id Software to buy the license of Doom, and thought, hey, now that I got the license to Doom, I should be able to print money with this. Not realizing that if it was that easy, then why in the world would id Software sell you the rights for $250,000 when they could have just put the CD into a 3DO and made all the money? I mean, it's no, you gotta put the work in. Let's see here. Literally Ghost writes, that's 90% of my experience with C-level executives in games. C-level means like corporate executives, like vice president, CTO, CEO, CFO, those kind of C-level executives. There is no shortage of C-level executives in which, why are you in this industry? Why? Martin BFF fan writes, people have tons of ideas, but getting them off the ground and keep the ambitions in check to prevent feature creep and pointless delays is definitely the hard part. Duke Nukem Forever devs can assist to that. I think to assess to that, I think is what he was trying to say. LOL. Yeah, feature creep's another problem that comes in, which of course, the idea of putting in FMV files into a game that's going to be shipping in 2 weeks, roughly, is feature creep and downright stupidity, because if your primary goal is to ship on time, do not tell your devs to do more work, because that is, again, that right there is my testimony about how it will get the jury to say, not guilty. Next street. Literally Ghost says, I worked on a project where there was no game design, no production timeline, and no real budget. The investors had invested because they saw the words Twitch integration. Yeah, I believe that. I mean, there was a time in which blockchain was the thing. Now the new buzzword is NFTs. You'd be amazed at how many people say, oh, but if your game doesn't have NFTs, I can't invest because that's not a growth market. And I'm sitting here going like, so you really, really want to go in a Ponzi scheme, huh? Awesome. Okay. Pat Avox writes, very funny for a church to fund a port of Doom of all games. Well, remember, when he first started Art Data, he wasn't doing Doom. He did Rise of the Robots and Chess Wars. So, Chess Wars is an easy sell to, especially people who like chess. But the specifics on that is stuff really that the CEO of Art Data is the only person who really knows the real facts. I only know things from secondhand information on this particular one, so your mileage may vary, but so far, pretty much is basically everything's lined up. Then a person writes here, Toyo, where's old Randy these days? I hear somewhere he's in jail or something. Don't know if that's true or not. Sure, why not? The former CEO of Art Data, since Art Data's collapses, since he is a musician, he eventually made a small chain of music schools in the Orange County area. And then he was accused of, and as I understand, found guilty, but that part I'm not sure, but I know he was accused of child molestation. He even made the news, and he was in prison for quite some time. I know, because I looked him up in the prison thing, and sure enough, Randall Scott, there he was. I know he's been released recently, but other than that, that's none of my business. But yeah, there you go. Other than 3DO Doom, do you work on any other Art Data's games or similar train wrecks? I did not work on any other Art Data game because I'm not a masochist. But number two, as I understand it, every one of Art Data's titles crashed and burned. So Doom, which is the reason why Doom was the one that Art Data was desperate to be the one to pull them out of their financial nosedive. Because had the game sold really, really well, he would have been able to pay off all of his debts and pay off all of his, investors or something like that, and then fund something new. The obvious would have been Doom 2. But it flopped. And by the pressing of the 50,000 copies, give or take, he pretty much spent more money on the pressing of the discs than he ever took in gross revenues by a lot. So all the advertising he had already done, all the press tours he already done, and all the money he spent to myself and that film crew, all that money was gone, and the money from the generation of the sales of Doom for the 3DO didn't even cover the amount of money he spent just to press the discs. So, as you can imagine, that's bad math. So, there you go. One person writes, I think it's now moved on to Web3. Context is that, what are the latest buzzwords that gets people to invest in your company for people who don't know anything about game development? And yeah, Web3, NFTs, blockchain, those are like, if those are the buzzwords that tingle you to make you invest money into a video game startup, say bye-bye to your money. I hope you enjoyed it. Let's see. Status Games Review. Can you see the comments on YouTube or only on the ones on Twitch? Supposedly I'm supposed to see all of them, but it looks like OBS is not pulling in the text on the other one because I went to multi-stream and I don't see any messages on there I could read from Twitch. So yeah, if there's any, if any of you want to actually interact with me, it seems Twitch is the only stream which you can actually type in stuff and I could actually see it. Let's see here. Let's see. I recall reading about Rise of the Robots and apparently it ranked 100th worst game of all time in 2014. Whack. That's Martin BBF fan. Well, if it's an Art Data product, it's symbol of non-quality. Jake Had a Cake writes, hello, are you into physics at all? What kind of physics? Astrophysics? Molecular physics? Video game physics? I've written a physics engine for video games for a flight sim years ago. And I watch a lot of videos on science having to do with physics, so there's your answer. Stus Games Reviews asks, I'll repeat here what I said there. My cousin's like a 500-page design document for a game he wants to make. It's extremely detailed. Unfortunately, I don't think he realizes the effort to make that game is at least 10 times more than to design it. Well, that's another problem, is when we're, if you, let's say, write the script to a Marvel film, you are all but guaranteeing the film's going to cost between $100 to $200 million to make, and movies like Endgame was $300 million due to the sheer number of actors they needed to put on before the camera. Whereas if you're just making a film like Clerks, which you're just going to rent out a bodega, or a small 7-Eleven, and have 4 or 5 no-name actors, and it's all filmed on a location, so you don't have to actually build any sets, then you could probably do the whole thing for like about $500,000, give or take. Same goes for video games. Is that if you make a video game that's intended to have all these grandiose visuals that look on par with something like Fortnite and the sheer number of 3D models and so forth, that's a lot of artwork and that's a lot of money. Even though if the game itself is a very simple game design, just the sheer scope of art is money. Every song is money. Every single visual effect is money. And therefore, like games like Undertale. The game Undertale was done with very simple block graphics, and even though it was still a very large and compelling game with a compelling narrative, it was done on a shoestring budget because it didn't need to. It was using block graphics. So it goes back to how much can you afford, and who can you get interested in doing this game if you don't have the money to actually realize your vision. And another thing also about game development is that if you approach a publisher who will then invest money into your game design, then you are probably selling your game design to this company. So therefore, if you come up with super fun game, this is your magnum opus, and you have these ideas of making comic books and novels and movies and stuff, and have everything make money to you, a la J.K. Rowling. And you go up to a publisher, like, let's say, as an example, Electronic Arts. Electronic Arts is going to say, hey, this is a really great idea. Let's sign a publisher agreement. We're going to put money into a game studio. They're going to develop the game. Oh, and by the way, we now own it. And now we own everything about it. Yes, we'll pay you some royalties for a period of time, but after we decide no longer, or your contract says you're no longer eligible for royalties, it now becomes a property all in all with Electronic Arts. The reason? They paid for it. They're the ones who invested millions and millions of dollars to develop this game, which could have just flopped. And nobody made any money, and EA is out of all this money. So for that risk, they take ownership. So what you got to do if you want an intellectual property is you either write a novel or you do your own hand-drawn comic book, create it out there, and then from that, see if somebody would like to make a video game based on your IP because it's popular, and then they will pay you royalty to use your characters, and then they'll invest into the game, but at least you'll still own the root rights, like Harry Potter. So therein is the problem. But you just can't come in with any sort of script or something like that and expect someone to invest millions of dollars into your idea without owning it. I mean, you keep hearing stories about people doing scripts on spec, or they sell a script. Like, example, the movie Volcano. Was Tommy Lee Jones. That film was somebody wrote a script about a volcano in Los Angeles. They shopped it around, and a movie studio said, hey, I'll give you money for this script. But once I give you the money, this movie and script is mine. You don't get any more. Bye-bye. And then they go make the movie, and either it bombs or it does. But your involvement in creating this story, not yours anymore. So think about that. Let's see. MC Wow writes, Becky, have you ever had time to put in the FMVs into the game? What would you've used? Did you need a licensed codec on the 3DO, or did they provide some sort of MPEG? 3DO supplied something called Cinepack. I'm trying to remember this from memory, but it was a plug-in for QuickTime, in which you just simply compress your movie with Cinepack, and it was a compression specifically designed for the 3DO, because the 3DO can then either through some very optimized ARM code, or I think they may have had a Cinepack decoder in there, but it would decompress it into a buffer, and then like I did with Killing Time, the buffer would then be remapped to a cell, and then the cell would be drawn into the 3D view. And then as the frames came in, I would only update the cell as the frames changed. So the game could have a higher frame rate than the actual animation frame rate. They were not connected to each other. And I did the same thing with Killing Time for the PC, except that one used actual QuickTime movies using, I don't know if it was Indio or if it was, God, what was the other ones at the time? But I know it wasn't Bink or Smacker. It was, but I think it was Indio. And I would decompress it into a buffer, and I would have a software renderer. It would scale it like a Doom onto the screen. And of course, it was made translucent, so it was another path I had to deal with. But if I was to put full motion video into Doom, the more likely scenario would have been at the end of each level, then there would have been a movie cutscene in which all I'm doing is I'm just playing a full screen video of the Doom guy running down the hall to the next room, maybe a couple of lines, maybe a monster scare, and then they would go to another door, which would then cut to the actual game, which the opening of the door would be a live action scene of what that next image is in the actual game. And then you'd play the level, and then as soon as you push the button that ends the level, it starts a new cutscene, and that's the most effective way to do Doom cutscenes, but that would require, you know, actual planning. Let's see here. I remember using Cinepack with video for Windows and Windows 3.1. Yeah, remember, 1995, Windows 95 was a brand new thing, so it would either be Windows 3.1 or Windows 95 in that era. Let's see. Always nice to see you go live, Rebecca. Hope you're well from Logan Wave. Yes, I'm well. Thank you. Fun fact, Google acquired Duck. DuckDuckGo. No, I think there was a... I think I remember that there was a video compression codec called Duck. But that was back in the 80s and 90s and stuff like that. See, DuckDuckGo was pissed that Google held on to Duck.com for a long time. Duck, the codec company, that's what I was thinking. And that was the basis of VP8 and VP9. Okay. Well, just so you know, in a history of video game compression codecs, there have been so many codecs over the years. I mean, today, now, most people are using MP4, using the H.264 compression algorithm, or H.265 compression algorithm, because most computers and video cards have a hardware codec to decompress the data. So then, therefore, all you do is just present the compressed data to the hardware. The hardware will then do the magic to decompress it and put it into a buffer, ready to be then mapped onto a texture and then shown onto your screen. But there are still some software ones like Bink and Smacker, although Smacker no one's using anymore because that was an 8-bit graphics codec, where Bink is a full true color, 24-bit color compression codec. But anyways, it looks like I'm about reaching an hour. Again, I apologize for the beginning of this video being like a few minutes of silence because I had to update my software, and of course, as always, there's, you know, when you haven't used Streamlabs in about a couple of months, it gets weird. Someone named Balthazar writes, I'm working on a project using Bink right now. Well, it's still popular. I mean, I have on my shelf right back there the manual for Smacker. It's like right around there. But that manual was when you actually bought Smacker, and it had the disc in there saying, here's Bink. And, oh, by the way, fun fact, I'm the person who ported Bink to the Mac because I needed Bink for a game called Aliens vs. Predator. So I got the source to Bink and then ported it to the Mac, and then I was able to then use all the Bink movie files in Aliens vs. Predator. And, of course, I gave all the code back to Rad Game Tools, and that was it. And my fee was a free license to use Bink on Aliens vs. Predator. And Balthasar writes, was that a port of the Jaguar game? No, it was a port of the PC game made by Rebellion. So, there you go. And let's see. I would have been disappointed if I hadn't seen some Mountain Dew. Well, Mountain Dew, brought to you by Diet Mountain Dew, because I'm already rotund, and if I drink non-diet Mountain Dew, I will not fit on this chair, and I'll probably break it by my weight. And yes, I am working on making myself smaller. It's an uphill battle. Okay, and let's see. Back to Poor the Jaguar game. No, it's not. Don't know about anyone else, but I think it'd be pretty neat to see live action FMVs come back in today's games. It depends on the game. Depends. Because remember, live action full motion videos, you have to understand, live action footage is expensive. Because if you film in places, let's say like Czechoslovakia or Poland, then you could just film with local crews and you don't have to pay union fees and don't have to worry about residuals. So it's good, but then the Screen Actor Guilds are just going to be upset with you. If you film in the United States, then you have to pay union scale wages and so forth, which makes like one-day film shoots are usually between $10,000 to $30,000. And don't forget, you need to build the sets, you need to do the costumes, and then the actors, because the actors aren't working on the stage for one day. They need to first come in to do their fittings, then they got to come in order to do the rehearsal, in which they're just, you do a table read where everybody sits around a table and you just recite your lines so everybody gets an idea of how everything paces. Then you actually do the day of the shoot, in which you get all these people together on the same day, and then you start filming, in which you set up the lights, film the scene, may do it 2 or 3 times, then you move the camera again, move the lights, do it again, and you do it for every single scene that's in the storyboard until finally everything is filmed, and that when you look at the dailies and you say, yep, this is everything I need, this is every single storyboard, I got it all. But then you bring the actors back later on when everything's already composited, put together, and they call it a voice track, in which when you film and you hear the person speaking their lines, that's almost never the audio they use in the actual finished product. The actor has to come in again into a voice room where they show the footage, and the person then recites their lines as they said it, but it's in a quiet room so they can get a pristine recording of their voice. And then they add in all the other sound effects, like the sound, that's Foley. So all of that is the shit you got to do in order for you to do full motion video. So yes, it would be nice to do full motion video again in films, but the reason most people are doing it in CGI is that it's a lot cheaper, and you can edit things all the way up to the last minute in doing 3D animation. The Infectious Madness of Dr. Decker was a great trip. I don't remember that one. Rebellion Monolith's AVP was great as well. Let's see, Fire. Believe it or not, I've worked on a project that was a fan-made animated movie. It was a complete trash file, and the director was like Randy in certain ways. He had musical talents and a creep. Yeah, there you go. Let's see here. And a person, Martin at BBF fan writes, yes, that is why so many films are being filmed in Vancouver. It comes as tax benefits due to local laws. Gotta ADR that. Another reason why people film in specific areas of the world, not just the country, the world, is because certain areas want to promote a film industry, and as a result, if you film your film there, they basically refund all your state income taxes, or they give you money to film there. Areas are like the state of Georgia. It's the reason why a lot of Marvel films are being filmed in Georgia, because Georgia actually gives them somewhere around 20 to 30% of the budget of the film to just write them a check. And the whole idea is that because they're filming in Georgia, they're hiring Georgia contractors, Georgia laborers. They buy all their supplies to build the sets in Georgia, etc. So it's stimulating the economy. Same goes for Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver in Canada. All 3 of those cities have organizations for film. And there was once an organization in New Orleans, Louisiana, in which they wanted to stimulate video game business by enticing. That's how In Exile created a studio in New Orleans, was that the state of Louisiana wrote them a check to say, open a studio here because it'll stimulate the economy. Another story is 38 Studios. They were lured to the state of Delaware by the state, and it was Rhode Island. Sorry, Rhode Island. Correct me, it's Rhode Island. And what happened was that they were given a large check by the state to say, relocate your company, 38 Studios, to our state, and we'll give you $75 million. But it turns out that in that particular case, 38 studios, they only got half the money before the company kind of imploded, and the state lost a bunch of money in that one. But point being was the fact that there were states, provinces, and even other countries in which they have film industries which will say, if you film all your movies here, or in some cases, if you make your video game studios here, we will write you a check for some of your money. We expect, of course, you fill in the rest of the money, and then it'll stimulate the economy in the area. So some companies take advantage of that. Mick Wild 77 writes, moving to obscure location makes it really easy to trap your employees. Ken Williams basically admits this in his autobiography. Yeah, fun fact. Back in the early 80s, I actually drove to Coarsegold, California to meet up with Sierra Online. And I saw their building. It was a converted Motel 6, which was, or at least it looked like a 2-story Motel 6, but the signs are gone. But it was still a motel, and that was their offices, in which each apartment was a different office. They did tear down walls so you can go from room to room without having to actually go onto the balcony to go to the next room. But it was that if you relocated to Coarsegold to go work for Sierra Online and you fucked up, then they'll fire you, and where are you going to go? There's no other video game company in there, so you have no choice but to move out and relocate elsewhere because, you know, back in the early 80s, there was no such thing as work from home. Of course, today, now in 2022, I wouldn't be surprised if there's like a couple of dozen tech workers in Coarsegold right now who are remotely working for Google, Apple, Facebook, whatever, and enjoying the fact that they're living in a forest. Belsazar writes, it was a wild locale for an office, haha. Literally Ghost writes, worked in a refurb bank as a dev house once. QA, we're in the vault. It rolled. Well, I also visited the Montreal studios of Ubisoft, and it was a modified like grain company or something like that, like a grain mill. And it was actually 2 factories that were in old brick buildings, and they just tore down the walls between the 2 buildings. So when you're walking around the building, you can tell this building's at least 100 years old, and that is where they had their studios. And then you had Ubisoft Toronto, which was in a converted garment factory, in which the building was big, interior was wide open because it originally had all these sewing machines and so forth because they made garments. But of course, when that factory closed down, they then yanked out all that equipment, cleaned it up, put in a nice hardwood floor, and then put up offices. And there you go. So it goes back to what's inexpensive. I mean, if you're going to set up an office, and it really doesn't matter what the building was, it just matters that can developers work in there as a team and be comfortable about it. More power to them. Literally Ghost writes, it's weird. DMA spun out of a bunch of places like Visual Science, Viz, Digimania, Real Time Worlds, Ruffian, Denki, and Praetorian Games. I think what you're... Oh, and there were some more famous Scottish game studios back in the day. The only ones I know of is DMA and GTA devs. Well, the thing, though, is that you have to understand is that many times video game studios are formed when either a bunch of people get tired of the company and they spin off and make their own. I had this happen. At Logicware, I had a group of employees who were not too thrilled with my business partner, and so they just, in a group, said, we're leaving, and they all quit their jobs and formed a company called Reflexive. They've since made some good successes for themselves, so good for them. But that's how they were formed. Interplay, the company that I'm most famous for, was formed because we all worked at Boone Corporation, and when Boone decided to no longer make video games and we were all summarily laid off, we were just sitting around the table going like, what are we going to do? We're unemployed. And says, why don't we just make our own video game company? And we're like, I got nothing else better to do. Guess what's founded? A lot of video games, that's the way they're formed. Because at least then, you know, because you've already been working at a video game company, you've made some connections in the video game industry so that you have a chance that if you form your own studio, you can use those connections to get to people who have money, who will then give you money to go ahead and develop your games, And with the money, you could pay rent, food, and not sleep in the streets. Literally goes from DMA was spun out of an after-school computer club. My boss used to work there. Cool. Anyways, I am now well over time. So I'm going to have to go ahead and basically say bye-bye. But I do plan on making a regular schedule of these things because I have now... going to be making an announcement in the next Burgertime. And when it happens, it'll tell you what I've been doing right now. And I hope it's really exciting, and I hope you come along with me on the ride. But in the meantime, please follow me at Burger Becky on Twitter. Follow me at, or my company, Old School, OLDESKUUL, on Twitter. And both of those are websites as well. So you can go to burgerbecky.com, oldschool.com. And those of you who are into Ranma, one half for Sailor Moon, I have this comic book I do called Sailor Ronco. Sailor, RANKO.com, in case you're into that kind of thing. But other than that, I wish you all well and have a great day out there in Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook land.